Hello everyone, my name is Catherine Ferreira. I am the host and owner of Gem and Me. I want to take the time today to introduce myself. Who am I? I'm a young, proud, first-generation Latina, born and raised in Washington Heights. I have excelled in my life with adversity, hope, belief, motivation, and most importantly, the power in me. And I believe everybody has their own power inside themselves. And I want to share this platform with you to be able to explore and dig very deep inside of you to find the blessings, the gifts that you were given to become the best version of yourself. So thank you so much for joining today to the Gem and Me podcast. I hope to give you blessings, aha moments, many gifts really that you have within yourself to be able to unfold and find those within you. Thank you for listening today and welcome to Gem to Me. The power is within you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. Gem and Me here. Today, I have the honor to have two amazing ladies, Dr. Vanessa Rodriguez and Janna Rodriguez. They're not related, I don't believe, but this is amazing to just share the space with them both and speak about an amazing event that took place over a week ago now. October 10th, and it was fostering emotional engagement learning for liberation, also known as FEELL. And it was an amazing experience. I had the luxury and the honor to actually be there and experience all that was put together, the workshops and all that stuff. So that was amazing. Thank you again for being here. Just wanted to give you the chance to say hello.
My pleasure. I'm glad that you invited me. Glad that Janna set this up for us to have a conversation. So happy to be here with you both.
And it's always a pleasure to be able to be in a group of Latinas that are continuing to empower one another. I always get like super excited, even if I'm not prepared. I become prepared because this is what it's all about. And this is what other little girls and little boys need to see. They need to see us and they need to see us in our space. So I'm super excited to be here today.
Thank you. And a little bit of Dr. Rodriguez. She is an NYU professor. She went to Harvard University and she is amazing. Like if you see this lady, she's like doing 100 things like at the speed of light and she is really good at it. So I'm pretty sure you guys are going to learn so much from her today. And Janna is here also because she was part of the event and she actually connected me and Vanessa. So I'm so honored that you did. Thank you for doing that. So my first question to kind of cut to the chase and get all the goodies from you. What inspired you to study teacher awareness and liberation? Vanessa.
Well, you just came out of the gate with that one. So my first career was as a New York City public school teacher. I did that for 12 years. So this is a personal quest for me. This is something where I am now acknowledging how badly I failed at taking care of my own mental health when I was in the classroom. And I'm not in the classroom right now. So the work that I do is really research. And as part of my research, what I want to make sure I'm contributing to is a better future for educators, especially Black and Latina educators, and being able to contribute to research so that they can have a future that is more thoughtful and considerate of their mental health is really critical to me. I have never been someone that was a fan of research. I often found that it wasn't very kind to me as an educator, to the students that I taught, or even to the communities that I am in affinity with. But what I do know is that there is a lot of power in research. There's a lot of power in data. And when we write down experiences that are our own and from our own voice, that is extremely powerful in shifting policy. And so that was all connected to this retreat. The forward-facing piece very much was a healing retreat, and it was one that we could come together in affinity and heal communally. But in the background, the other work that I was doing was collecting data and making sure to not disturb the authentic experiences of all of these phenomenal Black and Latina educators, and doing my due diligence and making sure that I could find ways to really document what they were experiencing so that we could have a better understanding in the field of the authentic experiences of these women, so that when I then am trying to advocate for policy shifts that acknowledge and see these women in their natural state, that is something that hasn't been done, that needs to be done, and really is where the future of the teacher workforce, especially in early childhood, should be headed. So that was kind of my interest in doing it. It's my drive, but it's all connected back to my own failure to take care of my mental health, and feeling like the system really did not see me, that I was invisible and I was really just a tool in the system to be used and exploited, rather than to be understood and honored and acknowledged as a human that was an intellectual and there to support children.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. It's so powerful because, like you said, you used what you went through as a teacher and used it to your leverage to your experience. And now I'm doing research on it to improve other teachers' life, other quality of life of teachers. And eventually that trickles down to the education of the kids and how successful they are in the future. So this is huge work. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I wanted to ask Janna to tell us a little bit about her experience as an educator and how she felt in that space.
I think it's important to acknowledge, Vanessa's amazing work. And I don't say that just because I call her a friend and a colleague, but I think that what she, focused on was something critical and something that's impacting early childhood education. So as someone who owns a facility where early childhood education is at the core of what I do, and it's part of my passion, I understand that mental health isn't even spoken about. It's somewhat like, well, what are we even talking about, right? Like, why are we even discussing this? Like, let's talk about theories. Let's talk about practices, right? And I'm not saying that that's not important, because I'm big on theory and I understand practices, but it's just a matter of, well, there's so much more than just that. There's so much more than just the book work to this, right? There's the emotional and social and emotional aspect of this that's just as critical. And so I think that for me, being a part of this and being actually asked to be part of something as historical as this is, because this is history in the making, because the fact of the matter is that this is the first time an educator has been able to create such a space that welcomes women that look like her into a space that's created for women that look like her. And many times that takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to be able to go against a system that's discriminatory and predatory against you. And so for me, my experience was being able to even experience that she was actually cultivating. And so it was something that was able to push the envelope for me when I'm always the one to push the envelope. And look at my own self and see if I am being reflective and intentional in my practices. And I normally am, but that doesn't mean that I have it all right. And that is okay. That doesn't make me a bad educator, right? It just makes me a present one, and one that's authentic. And so I think that it was really important for me to hear more about, her story, because it's her story that allowed for her to be able to cultivate something that's going to be as impactful as it will be. And I know it's going to be, because she's passionate about it, because I'm passionate about it, and there's more passionate educators that look like us that are passionate about it. And so for me, it was a privilege to be part of the teacher advisory board, you know, to be able to be part of what this would look like, and how do we ensure that everyone feels welcome, whether you're an educator that works for the DOE, or whether you're an educator in any childcare facility or any modality, right? Or whether you're an after school, you know, school age teacher. I mean, it doesn't really matter what your teaching degrees and titles are. It's about what you're doing to contribute to the lives of these children. And anything that we need to do and everything that needs to be done to ensure the success of each child, then we need to do. And if that takes for us to look at ourselves and take a step back and reflect on our practices and intentionality, then it has to be done. And sometimes you have to force people to do that, to be part of that change. It's not easy. So, I mean, I continue to learn from her and from all of the knowledge that she encompasses. And it's a lot because she's very bright, but she's also very, very humble, and she's also very relatable. And sometimes you don't get to have all of that in one individual, right? You have these people who are highly intelligent, and it's like, well, can you actually connect to them? Can you actually understand where I come from and why I'm struggling and what those obstacles and hurdles have been? I look at her and I see me. I don't see anyone different, and that's important. And so I feel blessed to have that.
Yeah, that's so it's a blessing, really, an honor to like see someone who is making it happen and that looks like you and that you could connect with, and you know that you have their support and they have, you know, your back, right? At all times, because that's usually sometimes not the case. As you and I were talking about last night, sometimes, you know, we do have people that look like us that are out there making impact, but they don't really relate to us or want to help us or give us a hand when we need it, and vice versa, of course, right? So this question is for Dr. Rodriguez. What intent do you have to impact the teachers? Like from this project alone, like what outcomes do you believe to have in the future, in the short term and long term?
So it's interesting that you use the word outcomes, because I am typically a person who is always asked about outcomes, right? I'm a researcher.
Yeah.
And that's something that I now feel comfortable enough in my experience, ripe old age, you know, several careers, saying I'm not necessarily looking towards the outcomes at this point, because I think that is part of the exploitation and the vicious cycle that we exist in, especially as women of color. We don't spend enough time saying, no, what I'm doing now is enough, right?
Yes.
And so the now that I wanted to create for these women was just a moment for them to feel like this space was created for you and by women like you, to honor you, to support you in your healing, to support you in processing the trauma that you have endured since birth due to racism, due to sexism, and to honor that you are intellectuals, that you are educators who support our most precious gifts, our youngest children, but that in and of your own right, you are a human, you are intellectual, and you deserve that space, that time, that support to be reflective about your own identity. And that is something where I feel like from birth, we are never given permission to do. And then we always ask for permission or wait for permission. It's like we are professional at waiting for permission. And so have had this question where right after the retreat, I then had this week-long conference from one of the funders actually that supported the retreat. And so many of the people there, which were also fellow grantees, kept saying, what's next? What's next? What's next? And it really hit me. And I thought, that's part of the problem, that we keep always asking ourselves, what's next? Instead of saying like, wow, like, look at that. Look at what you're in right now. Look at what you've accomplished right now. And so I'm kind of sitting in that space. Do I think like quite easily, is this something that I would love for us to be able to offer multiple times with other groups of women, or even do it annually? Of course, right? But I do think taking that moment to just stop and sit in this is really critical. Because it took a lot to get here. And even for the women that were in that space, it reminds me of the radical rest session that we had, where really stopping and saying, no, I'm not going to keep working. I'm going to stop. And that in and of itself is a radical act of resistance against white male dominant capitalism, So for me, just saying like the what's next, no, I'm not gonna think about what's next. I'm gonna say what we just did right now was amazing.
Yes.
And the intentionality of it was not like, again, the forward facing piece was come to a healing retreat, right? But what we really wanted women to also experience when they were there was that we were there to actually dig into their identity development, that we were there to really support them in that process. Because as women of color, what we do, what we're really raised to do, brandished with as a responsibility, is taking care of the children and protecting the men. Right? Take care of the children, we protect the men, especially for Black and brown women. And it even comes out in the language that we use. When we as educators say we serve children and families. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure that the entire event really highlighted and that was front and center was that we are no one's servants. We are powerful women. We are intelligent women. We are human beings. And our ancestors worked really hard to make sure that we were no one's servants. And that to acknowledge that is both empowering, but it's also painful. Right? So much of exploring our identity as a Black or brown woman is painful. And so we don't often do it. Right? There may be these moments where, say, my own, family members or friends might say like Puerto Rican power, but at the same time, if you dig a little, they don't want to talk about so many things, right? Skin color, hair texture, right? What part of the island was your family from? Because if you dig a little, there's trauma there, right? How could there not be? We're women of color, so of course there is. But that's what we wanted to get at this particular retreat. We wanted to get at what are the multiple identities that you hold, some of which are private to you, which you just keep. Now that might be because you're fearful of showing them, might be because you're not allowed to show them. Because if you do show all of those identities, you might be harmed. You might lose your job, right? You might lose your status. You might not be able to seek, certain employment or move up the ladder. What are your public identities, right? What are the ones that you show others? Because those are the ones that white male America approves of, right? And what are the perceived ones? What are those that you feel others see in you? Because even when we teach in spaces with families of affinity that are in affinity, we also recognize that so many of them see us in early childhood as babysitters, right? And so part of this retreat was to really dig into what are those many identities that you hold, and which are the ones that you choose to show, and which are the ones that you hold back and you keep private, and why do you do that? And what are the harms in doing that? And so, as you both know, from the moment you entered the space, one of the very first activities that we did was about identity development and identity awareness. And it might not have seemed like research to you, but it was.
Mhm.
All of my work is around identity awareness, the 5 awarenesses of teaching. That's research based. It could have just seemed like an icebreaker, but that's part of the balance that I'm trying to have in all of the work that I do, where when I am working with educators who, especially in early childhood, we're talking about 97% women. So when I'm working with these women, can I do this in a way that honors them and how they would naturally exist? And yet I'm able to both present to them work that is research-based and grounded in that, grounded in theory, grounded in what we know about practice, but also can collect data about their experiences. And something like, just the identity buttons that we created, that was all of that. That was like the trifecta, coming together.
Yeah, those buttons were fun. I had a
See,
good
you just
time.
thought they were fun, but
Yeah.
I'm here to tell you that was hard research that was
Yeah.
happening at the time there. But to a teacher who was in the space, it was like, oh, that was so much fun. I could do that with my kids, or I might do that at my next PD.
Exactly.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's so important because I feel like our identity as we perceive ourselves, that's how we project obviously to the world. But then like these kids, right, that are being taught by these teachers are also observing that, right? Like how they maneuver the classroom, how they express themselves, how they react to certain things. And I wanted to follow up with Janna as an educator and ask her, what are some barriers or gaps that she sees as an educator in the early childhood space?
Yeah, so I'm not going to get too passionate, but I think something that has stood out to me, especially in the past 2 to 3 years with the pandemic looming over us, as we still are enduring the pandemic, is the fact that when we look at educators, as Dr. Rodriguez stated, right, and we look at the fact that it's predominantly run by women, and then when you look at the data that doesn't lie and shows how it's predominantly run by women of color at that are undervalued and underpaid. For me as an early childhood educator, I start to look at, how small businesses are being impacted and how does that look, when it comes to early childhood education. So I own a facility that is home-based. So my modality is considered a group family daycare, which is a home-based daycare. And when I started doing research on ownership and different modalities, I noticed that center owners were predominantly white women. And when you look at women of color, they really owned home-based businesses because it was close to home, it was nurturing, right? It's part of that cultural assimilation and correlation it's difficult for us to let go. And as I embark on this new endeavor of scaling the business and opening up my own daycare center now, I see it clearer every day when I'm looking at the owners of centers and not being able to see people that look like me in those spaces. And it's not a matter of me being upset that white women own centers. I love that, and it's empowering, and for a woman to be her, a small business owner and live it and support it and breathe it. I applaud that. But what is concerning to me is the fact that someone like me hasn't been able to attain those spaces. And if you do see someone that looks like me that has attained those spaces, there's been investors, silent partners. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. There's not, right? I may need a partner in the future. So there's nothing wrong with that. But it makes me just take a deeper look at the entire picture and not just the one I want to see. And the fact of the matter is, me wanting to scale my business that big, it's like the percentage of people that look like me, it's like almost close to none. And the few that are of color that own, like I said, centers, they have a safety net that's allowed them to be able to grow, right? And many times when we look towards being able to not utilize, but look towards a safety net with them, it's not always there. And so there's just so many different components throughout this process, right? And this journey that I'm enduring, that not only am I looking at how do we create opportunities, economic opportunities for women like me, who look like me, who come from my background of coming from a low income family, being able to attain, owning a modality that normally takes $250,000 to $300,000 of capital just to even get started. And so how do we work alongside those hurdles, or work over those hurdles, so that more people have those opportunities, and then at the same time be able to work some type of system, because I think that's what I'm talking about. It's like breaking that system and recreating one that's actually effective, a system that then provides a safety net, so that other women that look like me can say, well, I know I can call on her because I know she's going to be willing to provide me with guidance and support, because she's worked so tirelessly to be able to walk this journey and be able to that glass ceiling, shattering that glass ceiling, that I know I can come to her. I think that that's really critical in early childhood education, because I feel like many are just left alone for you to just do this on your own. And because you've been taught that you are so resilient and so strong, you don't need a safety net, and you don't need a support system. And it's saddening that that's the system that has been cultivated, the culture that has been cultivated when it comes to a sector that's so vulnerable, such as early childhood education, that focuses on the most vulnerable of our population. And so for me, I think it's important to make sure that if I do walk over that hurdle, that it's not just about me walking over that hurdle, but it's about everyone else that's going to walk with me.
Janna, I'm so glad that you brought up the home-based care, because that is exactly the population of women that I was most seeking to support, and to really highlight what you all have been through COVID, through the racial violence that swept this country. When I originally got these 2 grants to create the retreat, it was supposed to just be a social emotional learning convening. And then COVID hit and racial violence spread throughout the country. And I thought we need to shift what this is, right? Because we need to actually address what these women are going through. And the grant was specifically for early childhood. And when I thought about who is the most invisible, who is the most vulnerable, it is really the women doing the at-home care, because you all are business women at the same time that you are educators. And as a woman, and a woman of color, being a businesswoman is virtually impossible. It is one of the most difficult. You are like a tiny minority of the business sector. And at the same time, you're supporting the most vulnerable in our communities. And so when COVID hit, the schools that didn't shut down were those that were doing at-home care. Right. And so here you were welcoming families into your homes, right, while trying to keep a business alive when so many businesses, even like massive conglomerates, were shutting down. You were trying to keep your business going. You were welcoming children and family into your homes when everybody else was on lockdown. And you were doing that so that the essential workers who weren't deemed as first responders, right? They didn't get that credit and all of those benefits. The essential workers, those delivery people working the supermarket, the nannies, those cleaning homes, so that they could be there to keep our societies going. So one of the things that really gets lost was, well, where are the kids of the essential workers going? And they were going to you, and you were staying open. And on a normal day, you're open from like 7 to 7. But during COVID and during COVID lockdown, you were still there, risking your own health, welcoming families into your home, and really quite invisible to the rest of society. Holding that while at the same time watching racial violence spread throughout our country, being in constant fear of that, while at the same time trying to figure out, how do I support a young child who is not of reading or writing age yet? I can't have them virtually, right? Even when vaccines came out, they couldn't get vaccinated. And so this was really a population that has often in our society been forgotten because they aren't a center. They don't have this like center support for their own professional development. They have to seek it out. They have to seek out their own support systems for, how do I run a business? How do I, as a woman and a woman of color, even get loans? How do I get, all of this is vastly missing from our society. And the education piece, they can't, Janna can't call up a sub and be like, hey, Department of Education, I need 3 subs to fill in because my teacher's got COVID. Like, there's no such thing, right? There's no massive system supporting them. There's not even a network type of thing supporting them. And so that was really the population that we said, when we think about in education, who is the most marginalized, it is at-home providers or home-based providers. But also when we look at society and we say, who are the most marginalized, right? It's Black women, right? And then brown women. And so that was really a group that we thought, we need to give them a space where they can just walk in and possibly for the first time in their lives, be in a space that was designed for them and by them, which is why we also had teacher advisors for the entire time. And that work is also part of research. It's called critical race spatial analysis, really taking critical race theory and looking at how the physical spaces that we inhabit are white male spaces, and what would it look like if these spaces were actually designed by and for people of color, and then in the work that I do, women of color. And so that was also part of the day, and trying to provide this space and this time to support women in that space.
Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. That's very impactful, really, because I was an essential worker. I was working for COVID, actually, and contact tracing and supervising teams and going out in the testing sites where people actually have COVID. And so like seeing it from that lens, right? Like, okay, these people who are outside in the front lines being essential workers, where are their kids going, right? And that's an instrumental piece, because, okay, then like also the educators who are putting their health on the line and the other kids' health on the line. And they're like, it's a whole cycle of trying to pull out the fires, if you will, right? Of so many things going out and happening, and we have no control over it, but at the same time, we're not being seen or helped. And so that kind of segues into my next question. As I would say, an outsider, if you will, sort some capacity, what are things that I can do to help, right, and be part of the movement and this research, as like our listeners are? Maybe they're not an educator per se, but they want to help and be part of this.
Well, I'm going to tap into that.
Yes, please.
I'm going to tap in. Let me jump right in. No, I think that, to be quite honest, I think that you and I had this discussion before, and Vanessa, you weren't on that call, but if you see another woman or or a group of women doing something phenomenal, and even if you're not a part of that, You showing any sort of support is exactly what we need. Because if Dr. Rodriguez wants to do a part 2 of the convening, which I am going to push for that, when we do a part 2 of the convening, she needs me to be there and provide that support, because she's a human being and she's going to have her days where she's going to be doubtful. And then I'm going to have my days where I'm going to be doubtful and say, should we really be doing this? And then she's going to say, yes, we do. And then it's like, okay. And I think that if we cultivate, and it's all about cultivating like that environment where others feel like it's okay to walk in. I don't have to knock on this door and peek, you know, and or look at my clothes first before I walk in. Or is my hair okay before I walk in? Or have I thought about the statements I'm going to make, because I shouldn't just speak? Because you constantly have to overcompensate. And that overcompensating, I am guilty of. And it's a challenge for me every day, because I've been put in a box where I have to be this individual that constantly knows how to speak well, walk, present, and be perfect. And that's not who I want to be. I don't look to attain of being this perfection of a human being. That's not what I want to be, nor do I want to project that. And so it's a challenge for me. And I continue to work on myself every day. And that's being authentic, because I can acknowledge that imposter syndrome sometimes happens to me. Even with someone who has been in so many spaces and has, you know, been involved in so many projects, I still have that imposter syndrome at times. And so for you to be part of anything, especially when it's a woman that's really at the heart of it, really, really taking it on, and you can feel it. You really can feel it. You can see it. You can feel it. You can breathe it. Just being able to just say, hey, you are doing a phenomenal job. Something just so simple like that, you know? And if you want to be, you know, that person that's super, you know, proactive and likes to be involved, saying, hey, what can I do to support? How can I support this? It's not just about supporting you, but how can I support this? Because this moment has to be supported, because it's going to transform our world. And I want to be part of that. And if we teach our children to think like that, right? Because we're not trying to make them think like us or think like anyone, but just to think on their own, but still have that humanistic approach of, she's doing great work or he's doing great work. It's okay to say that. It's okay. You don't have to be part of everything, because we're so used to having to be part of it, be the center of it, be at the core of it, because anything outside of that doesn't look like success. Doesn't seem like you're attaining success, because success has been measured in your mind or conformed to believe that you have to be in it, create it, breathe it, be part of the entire process for you to state that you were a part of that. I don't have to do that. You know, Dr. Rodriguez created her theories and practices, and we applaud her for her work. And I am here to support her in any capacity that I can. And that to me is a win. And that to me is doing my part in this journey. And I think that if we could be able to talk more about that and be able to provide that narrative that's just so different than the narrative that we're being taught, that we would then have many other people want to be involved, even if they can't do much. Even if they can't do much. You may not be able to be part of the event and be a staffer or volunteer or do all that. You may not, and that is okay. But you saying, I see this and this is amazing, thank you for what you're doing, goes a long way. It really does, because it's a very lonely journey when you're a leader and you're trying to change a system that has been created not to change.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm pretty sure our listeners are eager to know when the next FEELL event will be, if so. So I wanted Dr. Rodriguez to kind of speak about, I know she don't want to talk about what's next, but if
That's
you could give
okay.
us
I
a
will,
sneak peek
yeah,
of
I
what.
will talk about it. So I do have to say I wholeheartedly agree with Janna. Um, it can get lonely doing the work, and it's interesting because when people see you as a leader, they assume that you like have this whole crew of support, but it actually gets lonelier the more you know go up the ladder, so to say. um, Sorry about that. So I would say really one of the things you can do is just like show support, even in the most like peripheral way possible. Like if I would have gotten a text from someone saying like, yay, this is awesome, like it really does make a difference. And you don't think it does, but it does, because the more you are in it and the closer you get to changing a system, the lonelier it gets and the more obstacles you will encounter. And it's almost like that's how you know you're getting closer to the successes that you want, because more and more obstacles will show up more often and they'll be harder to overcome. And that's what makes it a lonelier place to be, because no one likes to be around conflict. And so the more conflict, meaning the more obstacles you get put in front of you, the fewer people you will have by your side. And so I just want to say that like that in and of itself is something that you can do, like, you know, give someone a shout out, just say, see what you're doing, and so on. Then I would say there's kind of two parts. There's a part of like, okay, what is the next FEELL going to be, and how can folks support that? And then there's the other part that I find like if we did some of this individual work, it would go a really long way. And this I also shared at the retreat. Like I would love educators to stop using certain words. Like, I would love for us all to stop saying that we serve children and families. I would love for us to all stop saying that we train teachers or that we're being observed, right? And I shared that this language is really rooted in slavery and servitude. And so when we say we train teachers to serve children and families, and we observe whether they are effective, train, serve, and observe, those that's language that we have been brandished with. That is slavery language. And I really encourage us all to stop using it. Sometimes what happens is we're so used to the oppression, we're so used to the exploitation, that we wind up taking on this language and kind of having it as a badge of honor. Like, I serve children and families, and we say this as a badge of honor. We almost are so used to it, we don't question the roots of that language, right? Or certain practices. And so that's a big one for me, where I feel like and that's where the awareness piece comes in. We start doing more of that identity work, that awareness work, we'll start to see some of the language and the practices that are exploitation, right, in the field. And then just small acts of resistance against that go a really long way, or questioning of that. Like, why do we say we serve children, right? We're not, like, a waiter serves me food, but then they walk away. Like, that's not what I do with children. Why are we using that word? Even those points of questioning, like, why is it this way, go a really long way. So I will say that. And that also is, if we could stop using the phrase self-care as a solution. I would really love for us to stop doing that, because it's not that I don't believe in self-care. It's that I don't appreciate or agree with when self-care is said to be a solution for the struggles that the teacher workforce is enduring right now. Because to say self-care is a solution suggests that the problem exists within the self, right? So when I hear a teacher who, again, with 97% women in the teacher workforce, and that going up to over 98% when we say early childhood and pre-K, when we think about that, when these women educators are saying like, I'm really struggling, like I'm not making enough money, or this is really taking its toll on my mental health, like not being able to see the children in person, or having to be open so late, or, not knowing if my business is going to shut down. When we in turn say to them, you know what you should do with that? You should practice more self-care. It's suggesting that the reason they're struggling is because they don't take care of themselves, rather than the problem is that the system exploits them, that the system is designed for white men, and it's designed to actually crush, use, abuse, and spit out women of color. Right? So the self-care piece in and of itself is fine. But when you're saying it's a solution to the problems, then you're suggesting the problem is the woman. And that only comes up because it's a woman. Because you will never hear someone say to a man, when they're talking about the struggles in their job, no man is ever told, you know what you should do, sir? You should practice more self-care. If you were to just practice more self-care, you'd be fine. We don't say that to men. So that phrase in and of itself, like so many of these phrases, are both sexist and they're racist, right? Because self-care also ignores that people of color take care of themselves communally. We do that within our families, right? We don't do the self part when we go to heal. So that's part of like, what can we do right now as individuals that I would love to see just like start to happen? Because with those language shifts, the mindset shifts at the same time. We start seeing ourselves differently when we stop using the language, I serve children and families, right? It's like, it stops becoming part of our identity. And that's part of the identity awareness. The other piece of FEELL, so I don't know if we'll get a chance to talk about like what the actual sessions were and part of how it was designed, but I do hope that we can bring this to more women. We were definitely maxed out on registration. We had almost double what we originally had anticipated. It requires us to get more funding. This is something where I would never want to bring it to women where they would have to pay, because that leaves out a population of women that I really am seeking to support. And so being able to get the word out and show that there's a lot of interest around this will help us to get folks to fund it, to get some organizations to fund it, and also being able to do this work so that women can see that it's important to be connected to research, that their voice and their experiences are critical to the data that needs to exist, so that we can shift policy. So them seeing that as part of it. And I hope it's something that we can, we kind of have this framework that we've designed for how to create this type of programming that is both rooted in feminist development, as well as having a lens for racial justice. And so with that framework, it really makes it much more feasible for us to design these type of events and this type of programming. And so I'd love to continue to do that in the future. And it requires folks really just, sharing with us that they want to see it, that they want to bring it to their programs or to their systems, that they may know or be connected to funders or willing to get the word out so that we can share that out to funders. So that's really kind of the, on the surface, how we would be able to continue doing this.
Thank you. I have a couple notes. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be part of this. And I do hope that in the future we do have other events such as this. And that was you answered my question actually of how you see this being like a framework. It could be in institutions, educational institutions, or while, teachers are being earning their degrees, right? Like kind of implementing and intertwining this framework to be able to kind of be preventive, right? And kind of proactive, if you will, of, not having teachers be, exploited and feeling like they have to go through healing. So kind of being proactive, I think that's one of the things that I see this happening. It will be very helpful for teachers to kind of be in this program before they get into the classrooms.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that is the goal. Like the goal, the big picture is that when we think of professional development, we're often just thinking of the practice. And when I say practice, I mean like what's the doing in the classroom, right? Like what are we expecting educators to be in that, space engaging with children? But I think this needs to run parallel to that, right? So yes, part of the development is about your practice, but the other part of the development really needs to be about supporting the educator. Not because it's fluffy and kumbaya and, oh, we just love educators, but because we know that has direct connection to their ability to support children. But it's even more critical for women of color, because what we're asked to do when we enter a classroom is there's this assumption that because we're of color, we know how to best support children of color, right? Like merely because we're in affinity, we can support them through combating racism or support the young girls through combating sexism. And the thing that I always find so puzzling about that is, how am I supposed to know how to support a young child of color in dealing with and overcoming racism when I myself have never been supported to deal with and overcome racism, right? Like I live in it every day. I sit in it every day. And as an educator, I am attacked by a racist, sexist system every day. And the reason I'm in the classroom or have designed a program for these children is to try to protect them from that. But it doesn't mean I know how to do it, in the sense of like, I don't know how to overcome it. I sit in it. So it is absolutely critical that we have parallel programming that is continuous, so that what we're teaching these educators is how to process that trauma, and then how to shift the way in which they engage with sexism or racism in their everyday work, because it's going to happen to them every day. And not just from white communities, from communities in affinity. And so part of this is we need to provide for them regular programming that is about their own identity development and really digging into this with support. So yes, the retreat was part of that. And I definitely would love for all of your listeners to check out our website to go see what the retreat was all about. We asked women to not take their own personal photographs or videos because we wanted them to just be able to truly engage in the experience. But we had another woman of color connected to education who was there as a professional photographer and videographer. And so we'll be uploading those photos in the weeks to come and videos. And folks can see what the sessions were about, who the facilitators were, what the venue space was, even all of the people connected to it, even the Black and brown owned caterers that we had, so that we could support the local community. It's all there. And that's on my website at teachingbrain.org. And you can see what the FEELL retreat was all about. And we'll keep sharing information there. And the hope is that we can, continue this and replicate it and bring it to other educators who really do need this support and who deserve it in those type of spaces.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I wanted to highlight like my experience and kind of go through a little overview of what actually happened, right? If that's okay with you. So I feel like my experience was amazing. Like I felt like very zen and centered and connected, and it was a very safe space. Like I was mingling with the other educators, and I loved the space, and I felt safe, and like we were healing as a community, right? Because we connected, and we spoke about the different challenges and things that we've been through. But the common denominator that I realized was that most of the experiences were foreign, right? Foreign to the teachers, foreign to everybody. They were like, oh my God, like we have to rest. Like everybody was like, oh wait, like this is really happening. Like people didn't find it common to just sit down and not think about anything and just rest, right? And the other thing, right, like healing circles, so like moving, right, and kind of using that as a meditation, that was another thing that people felt a little uncomfortable doing. So like throughout the experience, I feel like there were a lot of intentional exercises that were there to kind of break the narrative, like to get out of your comfort zone. And so like doing these things, like I really want you to kind of know, like this is the things we have to do. We have to get out of the narrative and get out of our comfort zone to make a change. And so the journey mapping to kind of finalize the overview was another one that was very interesting, because it puts us to kind of think about, okay, this was our journey from, elementary school, and this was our experience, in the educational sector, and how that impacted us now as adults and educators. And it's like, okay, that makes sense, right? Because that forms who you are throughout, as an adult now, and what education impacted you as. But also I want to kind of highlight, and I know this is a whole kind of norms that you probably have a lot of insight in, but how the household and the culture suppression, right? Like you said, our parents didn't let us make decisions for ourselves. So that also creates a whole nother thing, right? Like as adult educators, the educators feel like, oh no, I have to stay in this box. I have to do as I'm told, because my parents, I was told and taught that I have to do what is said from the upper or the leader or whoever the head of the space that you're in is. And that's also something to think about, right? Because I do agree that the system is made to suppress and to keep us in a box and not be seen, but there's a lot of culture, I would say traditions or social norms that are in place for us as, women of color and Black women to kind of think and feel suppressed, if you know what I'm saying. So it comes from like the systems, the norms, the social norms, and the educational institutions, and like everything. It's like all intertwined together.
Well, I think it's really interesting how, so you use certain words that are like words that are part of my mantra. So you said like, you use the word intent, and that is something that awareness is directly connected to. So when I talk about awareness, I say, someone becoming aware of how they engage and what their identity is and how that shifts how they interact with others. It doesn't make them a better teacher, right? Like merely being aware of my identity of self or my students or the families, it's not going to make me a better teacher, but it will allow me to act with intent. And that's the significant difference, because when we act with intent, we're not reacting to the racism that is thrown at us, or the sexism, right? We're not trying to say like, oh, I just have to prevent this from happening by either pushing back or hiding, or we can act with intent. And that's what white men get to do, right? They get to like go about their day, and like the choices they're making are intentional, right? They're not reactive because things are attacking them at all times. And then the other piece that you shared is about going out of your comfort zone. It's really interesting that you kind of interpreted it that way, because I would argue that I was actually creating an experience for you to be in your comfort zone. But you're so used to being uncomfortable that that was foreign to you.
Yeah.
Right. And so like all spaces that we go into are white male spaces. We're the marginalized in every space we basically walk into. So shifting to being in a space where it's like, no, this is your space. Right? It was designed for you. It was designed to support you, to really pull out from you all that you are. That can feel foreign and uncomfortable because we're so used to being in discomfort. So it's really fascinating that you saw it in this way of like, oh, I'm pushing you to step out of your comfort zone. And I would say, no, I was providing you with the space for you to be comfortable. You've just never experienced it before.
Yeah, exactly. It's mind-blowing, really.
And I wanted to piggyback because as Dr. Rodriguez is preaching her truth, I'm sitting here like, well, I say I serve children and families. Was that a snub to me? No, and again, and it wasn't. But you see, instead of me taking that comment and utilizing it in a negative perspective or narrative, as someone could take it, I am looking at it and listening to it and saying, Janna, please be more mindful of your words, because you're mindful, but you've been conformed to utilize those words because it's what's utilized in regulations. And, she brought up a very interesting aspect when she talks about public policy. And for me, it's really, really important that people that look like us, women that look like us, are able to be seated at those tables where those decisions are being made. Because unfortunately, we just have not been there. Because if we were there, we would not be okay with allowing such words as serve to be used when it comes to what you do in early childhood education. Because it's true, I'm not serving these children, but I've been so conformed into utilizing that word that even when I don't use it, I'll be in a space where they utilize it so much that it'll make me go right back to utilizing it. And so when I heard you say that, Dr. Rodriguez, I was like, okay, I really need to get my life together and really be very intentional when it comes to not utilizing that word specifically. And when it comes to the self-care aspect, because I'm constantly talking about the importance of self-care, but the fact of the matter is that it should already be there. I should not have to tell anyone that I have to provide myself with some self-care, or that this is going to compensate the fact that I'm having a meltdown or I'm overwhelmed and overworked. It doesn't take away from that experience. And so it's so important for someone like Dr. Rodriguez to have a colleague such as myself who constantly does need to be reminded. It doesn't mean that I'm not listening. It's just, it's been conformed in our sector, where in order to literally take it out of our dictionary, it needs to be taken out of regulations and the public policy aspect. And that in itself is powerful. So I will continue to work on not utilizing the word serve and utilizing self-care when it comes to me expressing the fact that I know how to take care of myself and I don't have to say this to say that I am. And so this is a teaching moment right here as we're having this podcast, because I've heard her say this many times. And when she just said it now, it was like, now you really need to get your life together. And so I'm going to get my life together.
Your life is very together. You're phenomenal. I think, I mean, the piece about intentionality is so critical, because when you exist in a white male dominant system, you're learning to survive. And so much of our mannerisms, our behaviors, our language is about our own survival and how do we thrive in this. And it takes quite a bit of intentionality to shift from what are the practices that are most common. I actually had just at this convening for the funder that happened literally the day after our retreat, I was presenting on the retreat and I was sharing, this is what we did and this is what we created and how intentional for these women of color. And then I was sharing out, like, what did we do behind the scenes? And I said, so this is forward facing, and something you always have to consider are, the norms of the group. And there was a woman, an educator in the audience, and she said, well, I really don't think you should call it norms, because the opposite of norms is abnormal. And so you're saying anyone who doesn't do it that way is abnormal. And it just hit me. Like, I use that phrase all the time. And I said, she's absolutely right. She's absolutely right. And the way she was looking at it was something I also always say when I say, well, the opposite of that word is this word. So if you don't like that word, right? When people say to me, oh, best practices, and I'm like, well, the opposite of that is worst practices, or good teacher. Well, the opposite of that is bad teacher, and yet here I was, like, well into my career, second career at that, saying, wow, I'm using this word norms and it goes against everything I believe. And so then I asked her, like, what word would you replace that with? And she said, oh, you could use practices, or you could. And I said, thank you so much. So even till this day, I am finding that so many of the mannerism, behaviors, words that I use are against what my values are, and how I have to shift that. And with the retreat, what we were really trying to do was provide sessions that weren't about, like, yay, let's come together and do yoga and then we'll leave for the day, but that really were grounded in theory, research, and also values about how do we support this population of women, right? Black and Latina women. How do we support them? And so we had a radical rest session, which you heard a bit about. We had a healing circle, and the healing circle, which was supported by Isabel at Harlem Brain, was really not just about, let's get together in a circle and talk about the things we need to heal from. It was this mind and body experience, really connecting mind, brain, body together so that we could begin to just see how we, like, move and exist in certain spaces. We also had focus groups, and the focus groups were really, they utilized from our prior studies quotes from other educators, both white educators and educators of color, all women, sharing what their own experiences were. And then the women in the room could choose, like, which really resonated with them. The reason we did it in that way is everyone's always saying, oh, we're gonna have a focus group, we're gonna have a focus group. But it's the facilitators that choose the questions, and it's the facilitators that choose the topics. And instead, what we said was, no, we're going to take all of these conversations and experiences that we have from our data of speaking with teachers and put it back out there and say, do any of these speak to you? Like, are these topics that you'd like to talk about? And then what might you want to share about them? Because unfortunately, teachers often feel like they have to be given permission to speak. And this goes to what you were saying about, like, a lot of it's also cultural, right? Of how are you a good young lady? Well, you sit quietly, you wait to be called on, you wait for those in the room who are in charge to acknowledge you. But what if we said, now here are teachers just like yourselves, right? Here's what they're thinking and feeling. Does that resonate with you? Do you want to, say, no, that doesn't sit well? And then where would the conversations take us? And then we also had the journey mapping, which is actually, and I'm not sure if our amazing facilitator Jessica shared this at the time, but that's a qualitative method. That is an official way of collecting data. It's creating your own education journey map. And it's interesting because typically we'll say from the moment you entered education, and many women will say like, oh, when I entered school, it's like, well, what's the first moment you felt like you were learning something, right? That is likely going to be with the person that raised you, right? So it's interesting that in white dominant America, we think like education is when I entered school. But the moment you entered school, at least here in the US, you were presented with a very colonial way of education. But that is not the first moment that you encountered learning and support in your own learning development. That is likely by the person who raised you. And now that might have been a positive experience, or it might have been a negative experience. But no matter what, those were your first learning experiences. And we know as early childhood folk, that has an enormous impact on how you engage with learning as you grow up, right? As you develop. Now, the education system, no matter what country you're in, and here's something that's critical for us to understand as Latinas, that all Spanish-speaking countries, Latin, Hispanic countries, we might feel they're more progressive and supportive for our cultural or racial identity, but when it comes to education, they're colonialist. So no matter who was in the room or what country they or their ancestors came from, the moment they entered a classroom, that was white colonialism that was educating them. And so it's something that is common across all Latin and Hispanic countries. And that's something we don't often talk about. And so there is likely a connection there between that, the educators you have, especially if they are women of color, they're often promoting further white colonialism in the way in which they teach. And yet our value system might not be in line with that. So there's all sorts of conflicts happening. But it's with that we thought about the journey mapping experience of like creating this physical map of your journey through learning, right? What were those elevations, the mountains you would draw, and the depressions, the valleys you would draw of your own personal experience? Because that understanding for me as a researcher, right? And to see all of the like contradicting, like, well, this is cultural, well, this is, an education system, well, this is colonial, but this is, all of that, that's data. But it's also something where when we then talk on the policy end about how do we recruit and retain women teachers of color, I think we need to start with even understanding why they came into education in the first place as a professional and what their personal experiences with learning were. Because what we know from the data, when white teachers talk about why they entered the classroom as a profession, they say, oh, it was amazing. I had amazing teachers. I was a great student. I had all these positive experiences. When women of color talk about the reason they entered the classroom, it's usually to prevent what they experienced as students. And yet, when we design recruitment and retention efforts, there's no difference, right, in how we recruit women of color versus white women. And if there is a shift, it is always about technical issues. Provide ways for them to fast track to certification, right? Or do their testing. We need to provide money for them to be able to support themselves in a program. We need to find a way that we can quickly place them in a school, right? There are all these technical solutions. None of them deal with, but how do we understand that their journey to getting to this classroom was a wholly different experience because of the fact that they're a woman of color. And if we would understand that, we would recruit and retain quite differently, as well as provide professional development and continued support. So that's kind of like that big picture. So it might to you seem like we're doing radical rest and healing circles and journey mapping and oh, that was so much fun creating a map, but it's actually helping us to understand who you are so that when we then do outreach and design programming and supports, it really is with a completely different understanding and honoring and respect of your experience.
Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez, for highlighting that. It really clarifies everything, right? The intention behind each activity and why it was selected. And it's funny you said about the mapping, how that, starts from home, right? And as
Yes.
Latinas, I would say that we can all say like, oh, when I went into elementary school or pre-K or things like that, we see a formal education, right? Formal education. We validate more formal education because we found more impact or intention, right? Intention in that interaction or encounter. But like, it really starts at home, like you said, right? And that really is like instrumental into like the person who we become and all those, I would say, norms, practices that we pick up on from our parents and beliefs and values and all those things that really intertwine very heavily, right, and into the person who we become. But I just wanted to give you each a chance to say any final thoughts or remarks before we close out and conclude this amazing discussion.
Yeah, so I just wanted to piggyback off of what Dr. Rodriguez was saying and just understand that each and every one of us is having an identity crisis. And to act as if you can't possibly be enduring that is you not even being truthful to the truth that's blatantly in your face. And I personally have had a sit down with myself about ensuring that I'm not losing myself because I'm trying to be who everyone else wants me to be, and ensuring that I'm not losing who I am. And they may simultaneously correlate. Doesn't mean that's possible, but I have to take that step back and ensure that I am not serving someone else and others' purpose, that I am serving my purpose. And it gets so gray that sometimes you don't even know what the difference is because you're so caught up in overcompensating yourself and culturally being pushed beyond limits because you can't even have a limit. God forbid you have a limit. And just saying that isn't for me. It's not fulfilling me. And that's okay. But that takes a lot of strength because you're used to saying yes. Because when you say no, you seem problematic. And being a woman of color, you already are problematic. And so you don't want to be a problematic problem. So because you want to be able to work alongside others, you conform yourself to the societal, and we don't want to use them, but they exist, these norms that we've been taught to be norms. And so how do you ensure that you take yourself out of that picture or remove yourself from that picture of what those norms are and accept yourself for being who you are, and still ensuring that every action or every project that you are part of, that it is fulfilling you and that it isn't taking away from you. And so I think that for me, it's something that I'm taking away, from this conversation that I've had with both of you. while we've been enduring this, hour and a half of conversing about what's really important, and just bringing up that identity crisis that everyone is really enduring, especially if you're a woman in this country, and especially if you're a woman of color, because you don't even know your identity, because you haven't even been taught what that looks like, because you've been conformed to see it for what they see it as, for what the system see it as, or for what your mother believes it was. So how can you know what that is if they don't even know that they are viewing something that isn't even a reality or isn't accurate, right? It's not true living. And so for me, it makes me, again, make sure that I am intentional in my practice and that I support myself wholeheartedly within all capacities. And that if I have to say no because it is going against my values and beliefs, the values and beliefs that I actually believe in, not the ones that I've been conformed to believe in, then I have to say no to that. And that is a challenge within itself. And when you can be able to show that strength to children, you are empowering the world. And there's no amount of money that can amount to that type of success, because that's like true success.
Janna, I feel like I should be saying like, preach it, girl.
Yes.
Yes. The amount of identity crises I have gone through is like quite extreme. Even in these past weeks, even right afterwards, even during the retreat, I can share with you a quick story of literally the day before the retreat. And we were just working through like the paperwork, like, okay, who are all the people registered and what bins go where and so on. And we had volunteers at my center helping out. And there was this one point where we were talking about when women first arrive and like when we're going to open the doors and what if they come early. And the team was saying like, okay, well, they're going to check in. And I said, no, we're not using the language check-in. And they said, well, really the easiest thing, just in case the iPads aren't working and the Wi-Fi goes down and they can't scan the QR code, the easiest thing is just have a list with their names on it and they'll line up and like we check them in. And I was like, well, we're not going to check them in. And like the team like looked at me like, but that's what's easiest. And I said, you're absolutely right. That is what's easiest. That is what's easiest. And it's what we all know. Those are the norms, right? And to do it outside of that would seem abnormal, which is a category I'm very used to being labeled as, not that I like it, but I'm used to it. And they said, well, what would you have us do instead? And I said, well, remember, we're trying to create an experience where these women aren't conforming to the space that they're entering. They are of the space. The space was designed for them. So what would you do for someone in that scenario? You would welcome them. You would say, welcome. I'm so glad you've arrived. Thank you. And they said, well, but how are we going to do that and check them in? Like we need to register them in. And I said, I would like us to think about this with a different perspective. I want you to think about the historical connection to people with our skin standing on a line where we know at the front of that line is someone of authority who has a list and our name is on that list. And they're checking to see if we belong. Now we're so used to it, we don't even think about it. But in our DNA is a slight fear that when we get to the front of that line, or as we're standing on that line, someone is going to notice that we don't belong, right? It's always in there. And that's the imposter syndrome. There's a ton of research about imposter syndrome, especially for women of color, right? That is that identity crisis. Oh my gosh, am I going to get to the front of that line? Is someone going to see that I don't belong? Is someone going to see that I should go someplace else? Is someone going to tell me to go someplace else? And that, even in that tiny detail, is what this retreat was all about, where I said, no, We're not going to have a check-in. We're not going to have a list. We're not going to tell them that they do or don't belong, we're going to say, welcome. Thank you so much for coming and for joining us. And then it's on us. It's on our team. It's on the researchers to try to figure out, how do we check them in? Because we need to know that they're there list, because we're also doing research, and we also need to make sure that the people, that consent to certain parts have consented and stuff. And that was part of when you got your tote bag, and we said, hold on to your tote bag because we want to make sure that we already know that we welcomed you. That was our way of saying we checked them in. They're on the list. But on the front facing end, you didn't know about that. You didn't have to stand on the line. And it was very critical for me to say, in the event that I've created, that I'm putting my name on, that I'm standing behind, that no woman of color will ever be standing on a line in fear that she's going to be told she doesn't belong. So even in those tiny little pieces, it was critical, because there's so much embedded within the way we navigate these systems that we don't even realize. We're having multiple identity crises because we're trying to figure out, who do I have to be accepted? And so when I say I was trying to design something where, no, this is for you, this is by you, that I was thinking of every detail to make sure that you never experience that fear, that feeling, that kind of visceral reaction that we're so used to, that is comfortable because we're so used to being in discomfort. And yet we didn't get it perfect, right? We failed, because then when we went to give out your personalized journeys, we flubbed up some of them and then had to say to folks, I'm sorry, can you move to this room because we messed up your journey? And so, this was our first time we were trying to figure it out, but that is the intent that we went with, that is how we were designing it. And so for me, I guess I would say, like, the last pieces for me that I'd love to share is it's exactly these kind of spaces, even right now, as Janna was saying, like being in these conversations that are so critical for the work and the work that we want to all be able to do together, that we're following what we know is part of our values, and yet always having to check ourselves and check each other, that we're able to both live those values, but in a way that is also keeping us safe and protected, and being realistic about these systems that we exist within. But with these, certain pushbacks and successes and supports of others who have been in those spaces and figured out how to navigate them, that we can keep nudging for change and shifting it so that it will be a very different future. And I do have to say, I know I'm going into like the I'm feeling old piece, but I am so grateful to the younger generations who are much more vocal about talking about their identities, talking about what like does not work, and like, no, I'm not going to exist in this system in this way because this system's wrong. Because that is something that I can say, I don't know that I had the courage to do that, and it definitely wasn't considered the norm, right? Often when I pushed back, I was labeled as abnormal, as difficult, as acting out against. And it was just something I couldn't help, but it was never something that I felt good about, right? So it was something that I was like, yes, I'm going to fight against this, but I constantly had imposter syndrome. I still do to this very day. I still do have identity crisis. Janna will often get a text from me very late at night or a phone call, and she has to like boost me back up. And so I do feel like the younger generation is much more comfortable with saying like, no, this is not okay. And feeling within their rights to say that. And so that gives me hope that we are shifting, even though it may not on the surface look like anything is getting better in our country. I can tell you that is quite different, and it's a positive difference.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rodriguez, for that final remark. Yeah, I am hopeful for the future, and just from this experience, it's very evident that we have to heal, right? We have to heal a lot of systemic racism and things that we bring up from our generations, past generations, our parents, ourselves, and future generations to be able to impact in a positive way. So I feel like it's a community effort, right? It's a community effort that we all kind of have these spaces and encourage each other to move forward and to break through imposter syndrome when it does arise, right? And be able to lift each other up and kind of trick the mind like, no, it's okay, you could do this, you've done it already, because we're so conformed, like you said, to like limit ourselves and like, oh no, this is not for me, I'm not supposed to be here, I can't do this. And it's a struggle we all deal with. So thank you so much again for being here and taking this time to have this chat with us. And I know our listeners and I definitely appreciate your time and this valuable knowledge that you shared with us today. Thank you, Dr. and Janna.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Right.
Identity crisis, that's the next topic.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I am so grateful that you're here listening to my podcast, Gem and Me. I hope that you continue to share, continue to listen on very important topics that I discuss in my growth and journey to what is called life. I hope that you're able to learn and explore different values and things that you have within you. I really hope to serve as a support system and a community to those who need that inspiration in that community, because I know that I needed this, I still do, but like growing up, I feel like I needed something where I can, see the examples and have a support system. So I hope to serve as such. Thank you for listening and have a great one.